evening. Calling to order the Tuesday, April 2nd, 2024 meeting of the City of Rollingwood Utility Commission. We will begin with roll call, starting on my left.
Chris Kirksey.
Clark Wilson.
Jonathan Miller.
Walter Rollison.
Elizabeth Bray.
Wonderful. Moving on to public comments. I didn't see any signed up. No public comments. Moving on then to the consent agenda. Discussion and possible action on the December 5th, 2023 Utility Commission meeting. I assume this is a minutes. Adoption of the minutes. Do we have a motion to?
I move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The ayes have it. We have approved the minutes. Moving on to the regular agenda. Discussion and possible action to elect a chair of the Utility Commission.
So, are you still willing?
To the extent that no one has any interest.
Cool. I was just going to mention this is an annual item that we have to do at the first meeting of the year, so
Yeah.
that's why we're here.
You're doing a good job.
Thank you.
So, I
Agreed.
nominate
We have a motion to nominate.
the present chair to be the continuing chair.
Okay.
Second.
All in
Aye.
favor? We have a motion for me to remain
Right
as
in there.
chair. Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All abstaining? I will abstain. All right. Thank you. Moving on. Discussion regarding the results of the cellular service survey, which I was just reading through. So thank you for sending this. Thank you for compiling the results. It was maybe not eye-opening because I think we're all kind of aware of it, but it was fun to read through for sure, and it's helpful to see some of this information certainly. So please walk through anything in particular that.
We didn't necessarily have anything in particular unless you guys wanted to
Okay.
go over anything. I did want to thank Michaela for putting this in a very usable, understandable format. We learn something new every time we do a survey. Things you should give, how you should use different options, because some of them came through. AT&T was written 4 different ways, so they were in 4 separate columns. So Michaela cleaned up a lot of the data for us. So things like that we've learned. But if there's anything specific y'all would like to go over, we can. We only posted this for discussion today, so we just figured if there was any general discussion and then thoughts about future action, we could bring back any future action items at a next meeting. So.
Thank you. Yes,
Sure.
certainly curious to see that AT&T is by far the cellular carrier of choice for the 25% of our community that responded to the survey in the first place. So that was interesting to see. It was also 50% of the people have no problems, 50% of the people roughly do have problems, and yet the vast majority still wanted us to fix it.
Can I ask one question about, these aren't households, these are individuals.
Just individual responses, right?
Okay, so we have 150 individual responses.
We had,
Ish, or 152.
how many did we total? I think we had 152.
Oh, so could be multiple from same household, right? So-
And some people, even like on the first question, some people just put in the box, one of us has AT&T and one of us has Verizon or something. So
Gotcha.
that's why they're not all, fully
understood.
consistent on number of responses. And most of them, I don't think any of them were required. So some occasionally got left.
Yeah.
Is Google Fiber a cellular provider? Just curious.
No.
Think so.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But, well.
And
but
several
I mean,
people.
obviously, you use your Wi-Fi with phones and
Yep.
cell phone service, and I think that may be for some households.
Using Wi-Fi calling, and that's maybe why they
Yeah.
decided
Right.
to submit it that way. Sure.
Right, and
Right,
I think
although,
maybe some people don't understand how to really do that, but.
listen, I'm one of the people that said Wi-Fi calling is not reliable at their address because it's not.
Right.
Um,
Well, that's because our Wi-Fi is sketchy, yeah.
And
So-
bringing in Google Fiber in the
Should.
near future should help
Yep.
that.
So
Yes.
Should
Yep.
help that.
Mm-hmm.
Should help that, which I think we probably all spend more time at home than we do in our car in Rollingwood on a given day, so.
So that may simply be, hey, if we can get a more reliable service, from a Wi-Fi perspective, that may solve it through a Wi-Fi calling within an individual home.
As long as, given with Google Fiber, things like storms and other issues do not
That's correct.
take down the Wi-Fi as easily as the current.
Given the fact that they will be in the ground
Yes.
and be carried to your homes in the ground, it should
Yes.
be significantly more stable.
Correct.
Sure. Yeah, the only concern would still be a power outage that then causes
Right.
That's right.
your
power,
everything
that's
to stop working, so.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Any consideration to emailing Elon Musk for Starlink?
Hey, if you guys have an email address for us, we'll do that.
Well, thank you again for compiling this information again. I think it's helpful to have it. I don't know exactly to what extent we can take serious action because we've tried it in the past, but I certainly have something to think about when we consider maybe doing something in the future.
No, it
Anyone
might
have
be a very interesting, I mean, data's always helpful, even if it's a limited amount. But it could be very interesting to reinvigorate a conversation with AT&T, who wants to compete with Google Fiber. And the reason why I think a lot of people have AT&T cellular service is because they bundle
Mm-hmm.
with their Wi-Fi. And therefore, if they want to maintain that base, then they may want to have more robust cellular service. And so
Our
possibly
hope is that
having,
the two carriers would want to compete with each other to try to build a base, but I think that's, our size is our limiting factor with that as leverage.
But I agree, this gives us kind of this is good data points to take back to them, and we know then now to not spend our time probably with, Sprint or something when we can be working on the ones that have a larger.
I'd also be interested to
percentage.
know if the city of Westlake or Tremont HOAs or anyone that is, within a stone's throw of us, have done any surveys or have any similar issues, because the Wi-Fi issues in this neighborhood became dramatically worse when the tower that was on Walsh Talton was deactivated. And so, and now that the towers are really way out on the rings, I would assume that this is an issue in this broader area, especially with the topography of this broader area.
Sure.
And
Yep.
so if we had that collectively to approach, because then it just wouldn't be for the city of Rollingwood,
Right.
it would be for the larger area.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely be happy to run that by Westlake Hills, and see if they've done any study or have specific issues. We may even be able to send them our cell survey questions if they'd be interested in doing something if they haven't. So I'd be happy to do that.
Great.
Great.
All right. Thank you. Moving on.
I'm just gonna have one
Oh.
thing. Phil McDuffie, 47 Timberline. When we spoke with Sasha, who's the Google Fiber representative, he basically said he suspected that when they actually start rolling out, that the city of Rollingwood will start getting a lot of interest from AT&T to retain their current customer base. So a lot of this should be happening, and it's also happening over in Westlake. So don't be surprised if some things get somewhat addressed, but I agree with you completely, Elizabeth, and now is the time to, if they want to retain these customers, up your game. So we do have some leverage, especially when we join with Westlake and all that kind of thing, and that's all happening, so that would be good.
And the only question that we haven't asked, which would come forward to this committee and ultimately to council, is if we could convince somebody to give us a tower for better reception. Would there be any resident resistance to that, depending on where that would be placed and so forth?
There would be some, we can tell.
There will always be
Right.
resident
Would there be
resistance.
significant resident resistance?
It'll be small and loud.
But, if we are getting down the pike, then you know, that's obviously something that we need to
Yeah, part of this
address.
initial exploratory work that we did over the last few years was trying to figure out if technology had changed such that this concept of the mesh network and microcellular not having a 100-foot tower in the middle of the baseball field, have we evolved since that option? And I think the question or the answer was yes, but you still can't have it. We're not going to do it. You know? But I do think there are some options if we can figure out. Do you have anyone at Westlake City of Westlake Hills that we have ever spoken to about, you know, question them who they work with and see if they have had this issue? Is it
We
possible?
can. I can for sure talk to the city administrator over there and see. He's relatively new, last couple of years, but
Okay.
I'm sure they'll have some contacts.
Cool.
On the bright side, I think someone offered their backyard as a location for a tower. So maybe have someone.
Yeah, there's a
willing.
few places. There's, you know, Delana Track. There's, you know, we already have spots where we have the pump stations
Mhm.
that, you know, the towers aren't that big any longer in their footprint necessarily, and we
Yep.
do have space where we have pump stations where that's on the edge of, you know, one of them's in my backyard. You can put it there. I don't care. You know, so there's
Some options
options.
if there's not resistance.
Great. Any other?
I had one small request. I was curious to cut it by AT&T versus Verizon, just to see if like Verizon was notably better
Oh,
in the
good.
survey results. Like
Well,
I
yeah,
have
we'd be happy.
I have
to-
Verizon. My wife has AT&T. My signal is actually pretty good most of
Mhm.
the time, when hers isn't. And so I was just curious if that's like an insight.
We can do that.
Yeah.
We'll do that with the data
Okay.
and we'll share that with you guys. We agree actually. I think we have Verizon on staff, and half of our PD has AT&T, and we've just noticed great service here. They might be on a different kind of police network, you know, like a FirstNet, but
I think it also
I agree.
depends on the location
Yeah,
sure,
for sure.
Yeah,
because, you know,
That's what I was curious.
down
to
where
see.
I am is in a little valley, and
Yeah, nothing. Yeah,
probably wouldn't matter which
yeah.
which one. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Several of the carriers like share equipment.
They share towers.
So
Yeah.
I know, you know, I'm not on Sprint, but my carrier shares Sprint's equipment. I think
Mhm.
maybe Verizon and Sprint even share equipment.
Yeah, T-Mobile and Sprint do now.
Right, so I think it's kind of like AT&T and the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know where the branch that is, anyway.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments?
We may not want to look into it, but there's a technology group here in Austin that is pushing this Helium mobile solution, and it's backstopped by T-Mobile, and it's like this it uses like blockchain, which like instantly like makes a lot of people negate it, but you can basically set up a tower on your house and become a provider, and then earn revenue from all the subscriptions that people have. And I was just looking, and it looks like there's like 2 towers in Rollingwood that 2 people have set up. And it's exploding, and so it's actually, they're very small, these little towers. It's not like a proper tower. You can just like put it on your, you know, your eave, and it's a little box, like almost like a Wi-Fi box. And so it's pretty out there, and so I was hesitant to mention it, but there are actually like ground up solutions that are starting to emerge, where you can actually like if we had a dozen homeowners that wanted to set up cell tower, little cell boxes on their roofs, you could do that, and then it's actually $20 a month for unlimited calling right now,
So
backstopped by T-Mobile's network. And so there are like solutions that are not as intrusive as the traditional cell tower.
right, and
They're
we
coming
had
to market now. So
we had looked actually at what if we set up a private network for all of Rollingwood. The challenge then was if you were on a call and left, your call would drop, and if you drove
Yeah.
in on a call and it switched net, it would drop.
Yeah.
So it was how do we? So then it was balancing a private network or a solution like that with a broader. Can we get one major carrier to at least improve
Yeah.
it and say?
When-
it's
What
still
was-
it's also still the geography
Yeah.
on those smaller solutions because we had one.
oh yeah. It'll vary.
Zero impact.
Yeah.
Did not help our calls at all.
Well, this is actually you connect to your ground internet connection is how it works, and so it's basically using your ground connection and creating multiple points, and they use T-Mobile as the fallback, so you're basically getting T-Mobile service with that. It prioritizes those towers when it can get them. So anyway, there are things that are starting to emerge if we really want to go down that path.
Yep.
If we really think it's that painful. So might pop up on its own based on like how the data's. A couple people are already volunteering to do it, and they must be getting revenue from it. So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Any other comments? All right. Next agenda item is discussion and possible action regarding a policy for recovering expenses incurred due to contractor-caused water line breaks. I imagine there would be some update on this.
Yes. Well, so this was brought up at our last city council meeting, actually by multiple city council members had approached us separately about this issue. So we, in the past, some have been isolated into certain areas, so you may have been a part of some of them recently. We've had quite a few instances where we would need to, the water would need to be turned off, followed by a boil water notice. They're generally localized to a certain area. We haven't had a citywide one for anything, but unfortunately, some of them are caused by contractors who are working on a private residence. And basically the main question that was brought to us was, well, what are we doing to make sure that we're getting all of our money back when these kind of things happen? Our current policy, at least before this, was just we use Crossroads Utility Services. They do all of our maintenance and repairs. We always have been charging, at least since we've been here, the current administration, all of those costs back to the person who broke the line or the responsible party at that time. And things like that and staff time are a little bit easier for us to, know what they are and to pass it on to the contractor. But what hadn't been considered in the past was the water loss. And so if you have a big broken pipe, water running down the street for multiple hours sometimes, that is going through the city's meters but is not going through any resident meter. So essentially the water fund was just taking on that cost. And so we had proposed the policy. You'll see kind of in blue in the document in the packet, you'll be able to see kind of some draft policy language. When this went to city council originally, and actually when we first let you all know this was in the packet, we had the water loss calculation, or at least the cost, to say that we're recommending charging what the city pays for it, which is wholesale rate. So the city pays $5.67 per 1,000 gallons. At the council meeting, there was more discussion about, well, do we want to, we don't want to just break even. Do we want to charge possibly more for that? And so based on that discussion, we did revise it to say the water loss in accordance with the city's residential rate structure. And so we have here, we passed out to everybody, and we'll upload this into the packet, what that rate structure is. We also, as far as calculating the water loss, we have found a tool that we're able to use to do that. You can put in the different variables, the time it was that the break happened, if it was a pinhole, if it was a crack, if it was a full entire section of a pipe gone, and it does that calculation for you, the pressure of the line, the size of the line. So all of that's taken into account to come up with this calculation. And our city engineers have reviewed and approved that. And so that would be what we would be using, and that's what we're proposing here to be able to recover from those contractors when they break a line. And so I think the city council, and I can let Councilmember McDuffie speak to this a little bit, just wanted the utility commission's input on, is there anything else we should be considering here? We have had people in the past say, well, is there a fine for this too, on top of that? Is there something additional that happens? The only thing we generally can do is if they did not call before digging. So we have a requirement that before you're going to call, and I believe it's every 2 weeks during a project, you have to call in those locates, so you are aware of obviously the lines that are underneath the ground. So if they did not call, or if they blatantly disregarded, marked lines on the ground, that we normally do fine them for that. We would issue a citation for not following that state law. But other than that, there is no additional fine or fee in our code for that. So just kind of, those are things they wanted to be considered here tonight. You could probably consider, I guess, depending on how much we want to charge for that water loss per 1,000 gallons, that could be somewhat of the fine or the penalty already rolled into it. And so just wanted to bring that here for some discussion and see if there were anything else that we need to consider for this.
I have a few. In no particular order, but all related tangentially somehow. The first one is there have been a lot of community complaints, especially recently, about the collateral damage that residents are suffering when these happen from the large fluctuations in water. And, several people highlighting anything from, you know, issues with blowing out pressure reducing valves and the expense of that to them being too much even for a PRV and having it impact appliances that had to be replaced and so forth. And residents saying that it's happened multiple times in certain areas where we seem to have water main breaks more regularly than others, either due to the system structure and or the increased building projects that are happening. And so there's been a lot of discussion about that. I think some people did write in community comments.
We did have a couple people email us
about-
earlier today.
Yeah, about that I saw in the, you know, ladies chat.
Well, is that due to an accidental break, or that was a pressure PRV that actually just broke on its own?
That was at, like, what had been reported by residents, I have no
Yeah.
idea about the facts. What had been reported by residents is that these things transpired immediately following a break in the line somewhere at the same time, not, you know, weeks later. So, you know, that's one thought. The second thought is on your, on the necessity to check in before digging, and if they don't, you know, they receive a citation. I don't know what the penalty for that is, if it is substantive enough to encourage the behavior that you wish, but also wonder what happens if they violate multiple things. Like, is there a limit to the number of citations they can get before there is a more "you're shut down, buddy" kind of situation? Because it's not just water main breaks, it's, you know, people cutting down trees without a permit. It is people, you know, saying that they've filed building plans with neighbors, et cetera, or saying, you know, on the demolition stage that they've given written letters to neighbors, which they don't. Like, there's builders that have violated things multiple times and have done it in multiple parts of the neighborhood, and yet we still allow them to keep building houses in the neighborhood over and over again.
So I can speak at least to, so for the actual fine for this specific offense, it is a state law, you know, that's all we can charge is what the state law allows us to. We can look into whether we can do some additional things above and beyond that, but generally, as a general law city, we usually just have to follow state law. As far as multiple citations, we do have a section in our code about the effect of multiple citations. I will say it's not particularly clear. It's a little vague when it talks about, you know, effects on a contractor for multiple citations. It doesn't really deal with whether they're at the same property or at different properties. And I believe the only thing, I think it allows us to not issue new permits for 6 months upon the city council, you know, directing that, acting on it, coming to city council and them saying, okay, we want to, you know, put this ordinance into effect. And so generally we track them now tightly. We have our code enforcement department that has now been, for the last about 2 years now, year and a half, has been tracking every citation, whether or not, I mean, if they're not brought to us as a complaint, but if there's a citation, if there's a warning given, or if someone calls in about a violation that a contractor is doing, it's being tracked. It's just the multiple citations is what then rises to the level of the city council. And so it's just currently a bit of a vague section in our ordinance.
Could we have a note, especially when several of these are related to the Utilities Commission, in terms of citations, that we would request that wording be looked at for tightening up what happens with multiple citations?
Absolutely, that's something that the commission can request. I don't know if we are posted for something like that today, just given what the topic on the agenda is, but that's something we can put on a future agenda, and we can bring you the code language and discuss it more in detail.
I would
then-
appreciate that. if I
Sure,
can-
of course. And then back to your first point about the PRVs. You know, we occasionally do get you know, comments or questions about PRVs. You know, we've never. I don't want to speak to any specific case, but we're not aware that a water pressure that the city can provide would be enough to blow out a PRV, or break it, or do something like that. Just based on our system pressures, from what we understand, it would be much higher than. It would require pressure much higher than what we can deliver that would do that. I think we could probably do a little bit better in the area of letting people know about PRVs. We find sometimes that people either have a PRV that's buried that they have no idea is there. They haven't gotten any maintenance done on it, haven't had it looked at in multiple years, and they do require pretty frequent maintenance. I think yearly is probably the recommendation. And then some that just don't have them, which is just a thing that I think all residents should do to protect their own pipes and appliances from any kind of fluctuations like that. And so we just generally handle those on a case-by-case basis. If people have, you know, questions or comments or complaints, they're always welcome to reach out to us, and our public works team is really good about going out, troubleshooting issues, usually finding their PRV for them if they have one,
Right.
things like that.
I mean,
So-
PRV was just an example. I've just called up the chat so that I have more details that are not just my memory. And people talk a lot about every time there's a water main break, then there's, you know, sediment and other stuff in the system that then gets pushed through, and issues with dishwashers, washing machine, ice maker, disposal, all due to sediment coming into our water lines from the construction, turn on and turn offs from water main breaks. This is just, you know, what people are reporting. I don't know how widespread it is or what the veracity is, but there's a lot of talk going on about it, and if that is a thing that is impacted by these water main breaks, then we should at least have an understanding or a position on it.
Sure.
I think the challenge is determining causation and
Correct?
and tracking it back. So while I can certainly am sensitive and can empathize with having to deal with that as someone whose wife drove her car through some flooring epoxy that was left in the middle of the road by some work that was being done by workers down the street, and required $2,000 worth of work just to fix the car. Who left the epoxy in the street? And of course, I asked, why did you drive through it? But you know, it looked like dirt, right? It was brown on the middle of the road. So again, the causation and tracking that back, I mean, we have a lot of work here. I think the fact that we have some language in here, my question would be, how do we know who's caused it? I mean, it's obvious where the water's coming from. You just follow it right back to the house, and that's how you know who caused it and when did it
Usually.
start and how much to bill them. And we have all of those policies in place to figure out the amounts, and then I absolutely would put, if not for the first time, the second time, a significant penalty on top of any cost that the city would, you know, so if you can't stop them from working, I can charge you 17 times as much the second time you do it. I don't know if state law allows that, but certainly there should be things to dissuade folks, right? They shouldn't be doing it right a second time, obviously. So
Sure.
to the extent that we can make it more painful for multiple offenses,
Yeah.
if there is indeed, you know, contractors in the neighborhood that have that, I think they should.
And not tied to an individual property, but tied to the offender.
That's right.
I was curious if we had a few examples of recent instances, how much would they cost? Do you know?
You know, I did one that we just had, and it was actually back when we had this set at $5.67 per 1,000 gallons, and they had racked up, I think it was about a 2-hour time. I think it was a crack. I'm trying to remember, you know, which one of the formulas we used, but it was about $7,000, and that was back when we were using the wholesale rate. And so if you're gonna put in a rate like this, I mean, it adds up quickly.
Yeah, and did that include all of the like time, the labor, materials, equipment as well?
No, that was just the
How
actual
how-
water
how
loss.
much
I
is-
mean,
Do you know, is it
Gosh,
Is that an extra 10,000?
it can be up to that depending on how long they're working. Because when we call in Crossroads, the goal is to get it fixed very quickly. So they
Yeah.
usually bring a whole group. There's
Overtime,
parts.
overruns.
And then
How-
city time as well.
How many, like, what would the overage have been? Like, do you think that could have been like a $50,000, $100,000 bill?
Oh gosh.
That's kind of my question here.
I
is, like,
mean,
just so
yeah.
we know
But
what we're
that's
looking at.
charged back to the contract.
The contractor.
Does cover that cost. This
Mhm.
is-
Oh, I agree. I
Right.
just want us to know what we're supporting.
I
in
think we
terms
could
of what we're
probably
expecting. I'm a fan of it.
come back with some additional clarification and maybe have some examples of if it was a break like this for this long, it took us this long to fix it, here's kind of what it would cost. I think that would actually be very helpful to see some instances. So I think it would get very expensive very quickly using this rate structure.
With these instances, is it always? I'm curious what the nature of them is. Like, I worry about somebody has a helper doing like gardening work, and then there's like an accidental break, and oh my gosh, they're like $50,000, $100,000 out of pocket.
Right. That's a possibility. Often it happens with large equipment with an actual, a home that's under
Construction.
contract
This
or
is
something,
related
but
specifically to where someone has informed me they're about to do a major project, and we know they're digging. Well, the new law will say, or the new law requirement will be that they inform the city that they'll be doing some significant work, right?
right. And I think this would also generally, I guess, apply to landscaping too. I think we run into an issue where often people they do landscaping and don't realize that they needed to come in for a permit for it because it's actually much more extensive than just your average landscaping. And so I think the way this policy would have been or will be designed, I'm not sure how much of it we included here, but we have a responsible party if there is a active permit. So if it's a home under construction, there's one person who's the responsible party. So any citation that happens at that home, any of their subcontractors, it goes to that responsible party because they are the one that is supposed to be overseeing it. If there's no active, construction permit open, if there's a landscaper there, they might call us in and say, hey, something happened, and that would be ultimately them or the homeowner would be who would be responsible for it. So maybe if that's something we need to make a distinction about here, we can do that as well.
I'm just curious to
Yeah.
review some of the past evidence and see, 'cause, like, what if it's like a retired person who got a crew and they're working in their yard, and now we're talking a
This
major
is
fine.
before. This has to be before the meter, right? Because anything after the meter, you can.
No,
It would
could
be-
anywhere.
It would be on our side, but there are mains that go through currently, front yards, some go through
Yeah.
sides to go to backyard meters. So this is when it happens on a city main.
For a city main, which is supposed to be how deep in the ground?
What they're
Supposed to be.
They vary.
Right.
It's supposed to be.
Well, that's why I think Walt's point is important, because it's where it's supposed to be and where it might be now, and if we're not giving our residents appropriate guidance in addition to our contractors, then a mistake could easily be made.
Sure, and there are sometimes mistakes. There's a bit of a variance when you go out to mark lines, and if they're way off, it's happened where someone went out, the gas company or the city went out and marked where our plans say our water line was, and it was actually 3 feet over, and they hit it, and that's not something that we can generally hold them accountable for because they did what they were supposed to do. They called, and it just wasn't.
That's good.
Is
Wasn't
there
as
a
accurate as
world
it could be.
also that we can just have a citywide water line map that is on, especially after we've done our improvements, just so that people know whether or not they need to call for a permit? Like, if I am planting a bush in my yard, do I need to worry about calling for a permit to plant a bush in my yard?
Right.
Yeah,
If-
or like a tree, like what if you were
If
planting a
it's,
tree,
yeah,
like
if
digging a
it's
little bit deeper?
here in my yard and I know the water main's over there, are we expecting every resident to call every time they wanna do something like that and check ahead of time? Because if so, that won't happen.
I think generally, and we'd have to check with public information laws, but like water lines and things like that are usually considered like critical infrastructure that you can't just share with the community where everything is because that leaves it open for, yeah. Yes.
So if a
yeah.
resident wants, currently, if a resident wants to plant a tree or do some other, not minor landscaping, we would advocate that they would call in and say, I wanna put a tree here in my yard, is that okay?
They would call 311. Is it 311 for locates on the entire, or is it 811? I'm sorry. 811. 811 for emergency, or for just not emergency locates, for regular locates on their property. You need to do that 48 hours in advance. the gas company will be called out, the city will be called out, everyone who needs to be there will come and spray paint in the yard, in the whole lot where all the lines are. And that is generally what the requirement is. I will say too, a lot, generally mains and things like that should be in an easement. Not always the case with some of our older lines, but of course, every time we're putting in new lines and locating things like that, we're now tracking that, so we have better and better knowledge every single time something like this happens, or we need to go out and mark someone's lines. But
And who pays for that if the gas company and the others come out to do all the marking?
I would have to check who pays if 811, if there's a fee. I'm not aware that there's a fee. I think it's just something that they have to do. It's in their best interest too to protect the integrity of their lines and to not have people chopping into them all the time. So, but I believe it's a state program. But I understand your point, though. I'm going to go out and garden today. Should I call 811? That's something you don't want to have to.
Right.
Worry about.
Honestly, this is the first time that I'm even contemplating this as an individual, so I imagine there's plenty of people in that same spot.
Mhm.
So one way or another, we may want to be giving some guidance as we explore the issue with contractors and home builders and major renovation work. We should take the thread all the way to say, in these different situations, this is what you should be doing to be a responsible homeowner in Rollingwood, especially if we're considering penalizing people privately and individually for incidents.
Sure. Agreed.
Well, at the very least, if you have a leak in your house, you're still required to pay wholesale plus 10%. We're saying if you bust a water main, you don't have to pay the 10%, which I think is, right? We don't have we're charging them, well, currently, you're saying we're charging the wholesale rate only.
Currently, we're not charging for water loss,
Oh,
mainly
right,
because
sorry.
up until recently, we haven't had a good formula. You're always balancing getting there to fix it quicker, or do you want us to stop and record this stuff, or do you want us to fix the problem? And I think now we have a team, and with Crossroads on board, they're excellent. I think we now have the tools to be able to quickly understand what we're working with and fix it in a short amount of time. But currently, we're not charging for water loss at all. So the city's water fund is absorbing $5.67 per
Right.
1,000 gallons.
But residents who have leaks in their house are required to pay the water and
Plus 10%.
Plus a 10%.
Mhm.
Contractors who cause a leak are not.
Right. I would say at a minimum, we'd want to charge $5.67 plus the 10%
As
per
opposed
1,000
to tiered
gallons.
rates, which is what is that why we're looking at the tier rates if we wanted to apply those to this policy?
That is what had been contemplated by City Council. I think there was talks about, well, we should charge the highest rate we have on the tier. That's something we need to decide, because that would significantly make this quite a.
Okay, sorry. So now I've gathered.
Yeah. Please do.
Perspective as to what we're trying to do here.
Heat up the passion for a second. I'm speaking on behalf of the city council. So I think the thought, first off, we didn't have this in front of us either. But the thought was, one of the reasons we have a graduated rate structure is to incentivize conservation and that type of thing. And the thought was, why aren't we applying that same standard to contractors and that type of thing? Not knowing the full dollar amount that might result in, I think that's the council may rethink and reconsider that, because it might just not be tenable at that point. And then all the discussion that's been brought up here is absolutely something too that we somehow need to make council aware of to think through, because I think the exact same thing. Like, I've planted multiple trees in my yard. I've never called to get my lines. I never thought about it, and I don't think it's unreasonable to think that someone may even plant a tree or do landscaping in the easement. We know the easement can always be modified or go away, but that doesn't mean we don't do things in it in the meantime. So I think this is a lot of really good things for it's a deeper discussion that I really appreciate you guys bringing forward, and I think the council needs to think about all that too. And I don't know how to get them all this information other than say, watch the utility commission
Well, I was
meeting.
gonna recommend maybe we do a quick subcommittee, throw together a handful of ideas across a couple of emails, and it could be treating, a main break is a main break, but a main break by a contractor versus a main break by a resident, it might be treated differently, just the way that we treat our residential and commercial lines. Pricing is different there as well. Understanding the using the tier as discouraging, overuse. The break was the break. It's how long it took before it got stopped will determine whether or not you can afford it or not. I think maybe the tiering was the right idea, except it could just be what is the cost above, right? What's the cost plus? It could be 10% for residents. It could be 25% for contractors. I'm just saying things. So we could start coming up with some of those ideas, and that'd be something you'd want to share to council. Is that a helpful way to move?
Yeah, I think that would be incredibly helpful. I mean, I think we should do that, and I agree. I think there needs to be, once again, we're back into the land of incentives or discouraging bad actors is the other flip side of that. And, what do we want to do? I do think it's appropriate to, what we don't want to do is create a structure that immediately, suddenly, you guys are dealing with monthly protests of water rates and, all that sort of thing. Like, I wouldn't think that's appropriate to open up on you guys. But yeah, I think that would be great for a subcommittee or a group to look at that, either in conjunction with the council or independent of the council, because I think this is a much deeper issue, and I agree with you. I think there are, at a minimum, it's very different for an individual resident than a contractor who should have a higher level of professionality in their workings, in their dealings,
And I appreciate, Ashley, what happens when there's multiple ones, as it is. Not necessarily all of them will be the purview of this committee, but I really think that needs to be buttoned up because, as an individual, I have witnessed far too many of them without any individual consequences, so I cannot imagine collectively how many happen. We might be tracking them now. I'm not certain that we're enforcing very much, which allows that behavior to do nothing but just continue to be tracked.
So I'll move. Ashley, can you just follow up with the commission after this to just get some folks to say I'll join on a subcommittee and see if we can get some ideas popping around?
Sure, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Once we get 3, then we'll go, okay, you're the subcommittee, and
Yes.
okay, great.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Just before we leave that, just a quick check of the 811 website. It says, even if you're planting a garden, you need to call.
It said that if you're planning to dig 16 inches or more, you're required to call. It's a state law. $1,000 penalty is where they start.
Well,
Again, someone put that in place without the thought of
Says if you're
enforcement.
building a fence, put a mailbox in, you need to call.
Mm-hmm.
wow. Okay. Well, we should do a service to our residents if we're going to be possibly charging them for things, to reiterate that.
Maybe include that either on the monthly bills. That
No,
go
no, no.
out
I mean,
or
if they broke
on,
something in the process of the
yeah,
water line, we'd be
somewhere,
charging
let's-
them.
No, that's
Some,
a
get
really
that
good idea.
information out
Potentially.
there.
Yeah,
Sure.
put it on something that they might recur
Yeah.
every month as a reminder.
Good
And,
bill reminder.
yeah.
Sure, and I'll even say
I
the
think that's where the discussion began, rather not whether it was likely.
the policy is going to be larger, obviously, than the small section that's here from the actual cost perspective. But things like, if you don't dig, you're going to, or if you did call, but the markings were far away, you won't be penalized. If you marked it and they were correct and you didn't follow it,
Right.
you weren't going to be. And then also, I guess the residential part, that's a good consideration. Lost my train of thought. I had one more important thing, and it'll probably come to me in 2 seconds. So, anyways, we'll let y'all move on.
Okay.
It's much more complicated than we imagined,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
but it's good.
It always is.
Life like it is
Yep.
sometimes.
6, which is update regarding utility bill appeals policy.
Um,
I'm guessing went to council
yes,
following our meeting. Okay.
it did go to council following your meeting, and it was approved pretty much exactly like it came out of here. I think they added one clarifying word to make the intent of what we had all talked about here work, but that policy is now in your packets. We will try to include that now going forward anytime there's, you know, any kind of request that comes to the commission, but we just wanted to share that that was approved just as y'all had requested.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good work to everyone here. Moving on to item number 7, which is an update on the water CIP packages 1 through 4.
Yes, I just figured it had been a minute since we had talked about anything here. We have a section on our website. We try to keep it on the front page depending on how many notices we have, but we try to keep it bumped to the top so it stays on our front page. But that gives a kind of live updates on where we are on the water CIP package. It includes a map with schedules that show kind of when they expect to be at each project. It talks about where they are now. Currently, they are going through all of the cul-de-sacs, so that was kind of the first section of this project. While some of them, you know, arguably maybe we're trying to go obviously the most urgent needs first, but the cul-de-sacs were a good place to start to kind of test out the, you know, the whole process, test out our noticing, test out how we work well with the contractor, and we've been very impressed and very happy with the contractor that we have right now. So you've probably seen them throughout different areas of the city on the cul-de-sacs. They're very conscientious, and they're always making sure that, hey, if we're working on this section, we should do this at the same time, so we only have to shut these residents' water off for, you know, at one time, as opposed to coming back and doing it multiple times. They're very efficient, very effective. Our noticing seems to be working well. We're generally providing people with door hangers before we shut their water off for an actual tie-in. And then as well as, you know, obviously there's a boil water usually that follows that, and then we tie them back into the new system. And so we're trying to be very good about those notices. But if anybody hears anything, or people in the community or have any questions about that, please send them to us. We're always looking for ways to improve that. But that's pretty much all the update we have, but if you have any questions, we're happy to take those.
All right, thank you for that.
Just one, what's the timeline for fixing the streets where they've, in the cul-de-sacs where they've done that?
They're going to be doing the paving in 3 phases. So they're going to do basically the first third of all of the projects and then come back and repave all of those. I believe they're looking at maybe like May or June for the
Okay.
first phase.
Pave one phase, 5/6/24 to
Mhm.
5/28/24.
Mhm. So yeah, that you know, a little flexible, I'm sure, if there are any small delays, but that's the goal here. And then on top of that, Google Fiber, we're working with them right now to try to get all of their permits in. We need them. Our goal for them is to come in after we do our water improvement, so we don't have to work around them, but also before we pave the streets. And so that way we have a clean street paving, and there's nobody coming in right afterwards and trenching in our streets. So, yep.
Thanks.
Of course.
So, to that question on Google Fiber, that time frame would begin possibly around when?
The hope is to have their infrastructure in the ground before we pave. So it would have to be for at least that section. They would need to be in before we can do that.
So they're willing to do, because our water improvements projects literally span for the next 16 months.
They've told
So
us
they're
that
willing to do us in phases?
they told us that they're willing to work around any kind of projects we have going on. Have not yet got our permit fully pushed through, but they have committed to working with us through that. And we were like, we're going to be high maintenance. Here's how our schedule looks like, and they have said they're okay with it. So we'll see how that hopefully goes once we get to the paving time.
Well, to that end, then I just wonder about the order of operations, because you said you know the most urgent areas other than cul-de-sacs were a smart thing to start with. The largest areas that also seem to be the ones that have the most issues are actually the last 3 areas of the entire project, and they don't start until next in 25.
Yeah, you know, I can't really speak to that whole process. That was many discussions at the city council level on not only you know, urgency, but also areas of the city efficiency, trying to get the costs to where we could afford to actually repave the whole streets, which is what we did end up getting to do. So the repaving will be full street, not a lane, not a trench, but the entire street will get repaved. So in order to keep costs at a certain place, they schedule them the way they needed to. That was all a council discussion that I'm not unfortunately studied up on at the
Because it
moment.
just seems like on the Google Fiber thing, if you look at the map of the improvements, just thumbsuck, maybe 40% of the physical area that's gonna be done, dug up, repaved, impacted by Google Fiber is all happening not until, you know, between February and May of 25.
Mhm.
And if Google's already starting, I don't know, it doesn't make sense to me.
They're submitting their permitting, but they have told us that they are going to work around our schedule. They've said that, you know, any improvements that we're doing here, they've seen it 10x in all of the bigger cities that they've, you know, come to work in. So they've, you know, it's in their best interest to get things in when it works for us, because that means they can get more people online quicker. So that's just what we're hearing from them right now. We have not got a, you know, a final permit yet from them.
So will they be turning some homes on this summer?
I
Do you
think it
understand?
depends. I'm sure that like they'll have to lay, you know, other kind of like the bigger infrastructure around the city. So I don't know if they're going to be putting in, you know, just the service lines and then connecting those when they're able to do the whole area. I don't know what their plans are
Okay.
on that. I would
Yeah.
hope so.
If you
Yeah.
get details on timing, that'd be super interesting.
Sure. Happy to ask for that.
And from a planning perspective and city council perspective, because this is quite a long horizon and, you know, an expensive project, whenever I lay those out, it always gives me pause to have the largest and most expensive areas towards the end. No chance that we're gonna run out of funding.
No, it was a one cost for these projects. So funds are here.
Perfect.
I don't know if anyone else has noticed, but it seems like AT&T is already responding because they've been rolling out 5 gigabit to the city, which, I mean, like, that's faster than what Google is supposedly going to be offering, and so it's the introduction of Google.
Yeah,
seems to be a
except
good
for the
thing.
AT&T connects and the way they connect, you don't ever get 5
I
gigabit.
understand.
Ever. So they're rolling out
Spoken like a
5 to
true
give you the
AT&T
one that
customer.
they promised
Yeah.
you 5 years ago.
That's right.
We have been told, at least Google Fiber, you know, like once they announce that they're coming into a place, you get a bunch of other, you know,
Yeah.
That's good.
service,
That's great.
so which is good,
They
more
wanna lock
competition.
in for a couple of years, but also I've seen ads from Google Fiber that are talking 5 gig, and they're now gonna have 20 gig as well, so.
How do you even use that?
AT&T is still
I've
gonna be limited by 32
God.
connections at the connection point and a
Yeah.
limited number of them.
Yeah.
And that's still,
I don't know.
you're never gonna
You
get
have no faith.
the bandwidth. I've been down this road a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. That's exciting. We're gonna have some real competition. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, better services.
All right, thank you for the update.
Of
And then
course.
finally, number 8, update on the electronic water meter project.
Very excited to say that this is going to happen this year. Originally, so we've worked the contract with Amoresco. That is the company that's going to be rolling these out for us. Originally, they got like a 10-month is how long it was going to take to get all the meters delivered to us. So it was looking like it was going to be far, far away. But we have now confirmed, I believe in June, they are going to be able to drop all of those meters here. May, June, maybe even a little bit earlier. So project timeline, we're looking at probably by August, we'll have our electronic meter program rolled out and going. So very exciting. But
Very cool.
we'll try to bring a more refined update next time. It's still kind of, you know, things are still a little bit in flux, but we do have the delivery for sure happening earlier this year than we were expecting. So hopefully a little even earlier than August for the whole rollout. But
You can install all of the meters in a couple months.
they will, yes, it's kind of a turnkey project. I guess it makes sense to do them more all at once
Oh, for sure.
because, you know, when you
Okay.
get going and then
That
you
makes
have
sense.
your system that you have to kind of bring on board. And so if we're going to be doing it ourselves, we'd be doing 1, 2, you know, I don't know how many we could get to in a day, maybe 4 or 5, but this group can do kind of all at once. So it seems to be like it's going to be about a 2-month project from, like, for actually physically rolling out
So
the
there will be
meters.
like another crew in like the sweltering hottest part of the summer out on the streets.
Yep.
installing meters. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually pretty cool too. There's a lot more behind the scenes of not just only, you know, installing the physical meter, but getting the reading of what the current meter is so we don't disrupt, you know, the reading, recording that, putting the new one, getting the new meter number, plugging it into our system. So it's a lot, and they're gonna do turnkey all of it for us. So it's gonna be great.
And I'm gonna jump up again.
Yes, of course, please do.
So something that you might want to give thought to as well is ways to best educate our community with the app, the Ion Water, that you can look on your computer at, I think it's 15 or 10-minute intervals. But you can also you have to go in and set up your profile and set up, like, do you want to be notified? Basically, it could notify people on their phones if there's a water break and that type of stuff. If they've got a leak, those type of things. But that has to be set up. Like, it's not automatic. They have to go out there and say, yeah, if it exceeds this amount in this short of a time, I absolutely want to be notified and that type of thing. So just maybe for the next meeting we can put it on the agenda, but give some thought to how best to, once we roll out, to educate people that, you know, we have this capability now. Here's how to utilize that. If you think that's worthwhile, I think it's probably
think it is
worthwhile.
I mean, having just rolled out an app and had to teach a lot of volunteers how to use it,
Exactly.
different people have different learning styles, and you just sadly have to cover them all. And so you need to have written instructions that are available for people to pull up. You need to have a video tutorial, and then you need to make probably 3 different training sessions, like every Tuesday for a month or something, which are live Zoom that people can dial into, where they're walked through step by step and have an opportunity to ask a question.
Yeah, that sounds good.
And so if you do those 3 things, there will be the tech savvy people that can either read or watch the video and get it in day 1, and there will be others that will need to be walked through in a specific live training.
I'm imagining the progressive, is that some commercials? Turning to your parents and they're like teaching everyone how to use their phones.
Right.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not only is it in their best interest, but it's in all of our best interest,
Correct.
because we have this limitation on use of water coming from Austin. So, and hopefully too, it will start cutting down the protests of, or getting adjustments on your rates
Yeah, the
and all that
information
sort of
is
stuff.
great.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
it'll be great. So.
Thank you. We have no more items on the agenda, but are you here to present something?
No, I was supposed to be here tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
You're so
Wow,
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. This is
I don't want
utility.
to be rude.
Great, well,
oh my gosh, you're so nice.
Yeah.
without any other items, I'll move